the first myth that we're going to tackle is hot takes are what sells. And where this myth comes from is definitely there's a perception that analysts get paid to make up categories, to make up buzzwords. If we look over the last few years, whether you think they're real or not, there's categories like ASPM, which we can
Yeah.
talk about today. Um, Shift left, I think, may have come from an analyst at some point. Um, what would you say about what this myth means and where the truth in it lies and where perhaps it's busted?
Yeah. I think there's obviously incentive, right, in the tech industry to coin new trends and categories, to be the person, whether you're an analyst or not, to excuse me, have created a trend or a category. As much as we're currently in an acronym soup most of the time. The way I look at it is that an analyst job really is to interpret the market, not manufacture it. And I think one important thing to understand about working with analysts is our job is to help you make sense of like where a company or a vendor fits into broader trends, to understand how a market is likely to evolve, and what we're seeing across vendors, users, and the data that we collect. And that doesn't mean that like hot takes are wrong. I mean, I have plenty of them, but I don't think that it's the MO for every analyst or every firm, right? And I'm personally not a big fan of acronym making. I have not made an acronym or a category in my time as an analyst, just like for its own sake. I think maybe what will help a little bit is to talk about what it is I actually do on a day-to-day basis. That, in my day, I'm often spending my time either I take briefings from vendors. So I cover application security and software supply chain security. So vendors in that space, they meet with me on a fairly regular basis. They walk me through their products, new features, their roadmaps. I also take inquiry calls from vendors too who want feedback. They look to me to test their messaging, their strategy, or they might want to say competitive or market intelligence. But I also speak with not just vendors. I talk with end users. I'll have calls where a large enterprise will come to me and say, we're shortlisting a SaaS tool, and we want like an outside neutral perspective on, this is our list. Are we missing anybody? That maybe there's somebody in the market they haven't considered yet. And I help work through their maybe list of priorities and help them align them with what I know from all the briefings that I do about what a vendor offers. I also talk to investors who want to understand where a market segment is headed. So like bankers and folks that are, putting the money into the market, right? They look to me to understand larger trends and themes. And then all of this comes together in that I write research. I have what's called a research practice. I put together reports. I get to conduct surveys annually. And then I go to like conferences. I speak on panels and in webinars like this. And I try to stay active and engaged with, practitioners and vendors on social media. And so all of that, at the end of the day, I think in terms of the busting, while I definitely think, I'd say this was plausible if we're thinking about the show, right? Like there are plenty of analysts that you can blame for acronym creation, but I think that is sort of a surface level what comes out of all of the work that we're doing to sort of be those. I think I like to look at myself as like maybe a trusted advisor to that's sort of a independent party, for a lot of different audiences.
I think that segues really nicely into myth number two, which is analysts are pay to play. And if we like unravel that a little bit, how can I expect you to be a trusted advisor if you're getting paid to push a vendor? So, what would you say about that particular myth?
Yeah, I think this is probably maybe the most like vocal or long-standing myth about the analyst industry, and I get why it persists. I mean, after all, analyst firms are businesses, right? You can't deny that, and it's so there's always exchanges of money. Vendors do pay and to work with analysts, right? But speaking, which I can only do is speak for myself and for IDC, right? I can't speak for all analyst firms, but I would generally say this is pretty true from, I have lots of friends that work at all of the competitive firms as well. And the one thing I can say is that the research that I publish into my practice and the advisory that I give particularly to end users is conducted completely independently of those things. And so I can kind of give you an example of, I just recently did an IDC MarketScape, which is one of those vendor evaluation pieces of research. And these are the things that usually drive a lot of the pay for play conversations. There's a lot of opinions, right? When you go and out there as an analyst and you put out like this chart and that's all anybody sees, right? Is the little dots and where they landed. And everybody has thoughts about the correctness of that, right? Or how did I come to those conclusions? And oftentimes, because of the way the analyst firm model, especially for the like larger firms, a lot of stuff is paywalled, right? Or it's like deep, the methodology is buried deep in, my report was like 54 pages, right? And the like back of it explained how it was all done. But when I did that piece of research, that involved a pre-qualification survey, I had to set criteria. I had a 125 question RFI that they had to answer. Each vendor that participated had to do an hour demo and an hour briefing, and they had to give me customer references that I surveyed and talked on the phone to. And then I took all of that information and it went into a very granular, detailed, a rubric really. And it was a very quantitative process behind that. But that stuff isn't like, unless you're the analyst that's doing it, that's all you see is the chart, right? So I think the thing to kind of narrow in on is that, while analyst firms are businesses, the integrity of the research is what gives that business value. If there isn't independence, the whole model falls apart, right? So I think of all of the things I would slap busted on, at least for myself, right, is that the research that I'm doing, whether a vendor is a client of IDC's or has paid IDC any money over time, does not influence my research in any way.
You and I have talked a little bit about how to decide if an analyst firm is right for your specific use case. So you've mentioned several times that IDC and you yourself focus on research. Can you talk a little bit about the other categories, the other flavors of analyst firms that are out there, as people are thinking, like, do I want to bounce ideas off a firm? Like, what are the choices?
Yeah. There are a lot of times you hear like the big three, right? Like IDC, Gartner, Forrester are probably the most well-known firms, but there are tens, 20, like there are a lot of smaller or boutique firms. And each one sort of has this like flavor of what they're good at. IDC is known for market sizing and forecasting. We model every vendor in a market, and we have the International Data Company. If you didn't know, that's what IDC stands for. And so, excuse me, our research is very data oriented. We do a lot of surveying, that kind of stuff. But then you have other analyst firms. Some focus more on, like, say, end user advisory work. Maybe they if you split your time between vendors and end users, they spend more time advising enterprises than they do maybe talking to vendors. Others really focus on like influence, maybe social media presence, and do more, say, like content marketing, where they'll partner, with a vendor and develop something and have that sort of neutral or independent validation of the work that they're doing. And then also it's like some cater more towards different sizes of organizations. So, some look more towards startups and helping them get visibility. Others maybe primarily serve like enterprise clients, and that one like really deep dives into those like established vendors in a market. So a lot of times it's just a matter of figuring out what it is that you're looking to get out of an analyst relationship, and then kind of seeing who's out there and matching up with them. And also some of it's personality too. Like I frequently work with people because they just like working with me, right? Regardless of what area I'm covering. My boss for many years at IDC had folks that would continue to cut. He was an analyst for 35 years, and the connections he built across the industry, like people just trusted him as a neutral third party, regardless of what his like coverage area was, what market he was researching, and then would just work with him, over his whole course of time as an analyst.
All right, we have a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to skip one of our myths, and I'm going to address the third myth, and then we're going to go to the Q&A.
All right.
The third myth that we're going to talk about is analysts are out of touch. They're not practitioners. They're not in the job. Why would I can go call up, my friend who works at another company. Why would I trust an analyst who's not in the role?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Honestly, a good example here is I was not an application security practitioner before becoming an analyst. And kind of getting to there, a lot of analysts, some do come from a practitioner background. That's not an uncommon path for someone to take. They, maybe have been a practitioner, and a lot of times, I will say, as a younger woman, I am an anomaly in the analyst world. Oftentimes, you find more seasoned individuals, right, that have been around for a long time. But the thing is whether they were practitioners or not, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of touch. And some of the best analysts I find come from like really non-traditional backgrounds, because the core skills of what we do are more analytical, not necessarily operational. So like, for example, while being a practitioner in whatever field or market you're researching is helpful, because it does obviously help you understand how certain technologies are implemented, or maybe had experience with real world challenges. Sometimes that can create blind spots too, of like, you have this view of like, this is how we did it at the organization I worked at for the last 20 years. And it makes it harder to step back and see how the market as a whole is evolving, because being an analyst requires you to look across like hundreds of companies. I mean, I alone in application security, probably, I want to say my like spreadsheet, like database I have built has like 800 vendors on it, and the myriad technologies underneath of that I track. And that broad view and the ability to identify shifts and trends, that's not necessarily visible from like any single practitioner's perspective. So, and I think the other thing I'll say on this too is that like technology also changes so rapidly that even if you had hands-on experience at one point, and you would see that as valuable, that can become dated itself, right, pretty fast. So I think the important thing to think about analysts is it's more about that ability to ask the right questions, to connect the dots across like disparate data, to identify patterns, right? It's about like, I look at my skill set is that I'm really curious, I'm a critical thinker, and you also have to be able to clearly communicate things, because part of our job is translating like really complex and sometimes conflicting information into insights that people can actually like act on. And a lot of times I think what people say about analysts is we kind of have this bird's eye view, right? There's a particular position we have when looking at a market that not a lot of people have. I get to talk to like people who are direct competitors with each other and talk to their customers and go to user conferences and talk to the people investing money into the market. So I kind of have all of these different perspectives. So whether I've been able to learn the ins and outs of application security, about the topic and the technology, but like to do my job well, it's more about the skill set that's brought in my opinion.
Yeah, so we have an interesting question about AI and how it might be disrupting the job of a tech analyst or even the necessity for a tech analyst. So let's like maybe talk a little both like short term and long term, because I think short term we're not seeing I would not anticipate AI would replace analysts short term just based on, you know, what you just said. But where do you see maybe it supplementing or replacing?
Yeah, I think right now, this is a good question, and we ask it ourselves, like in the industry, and it's something we think about, right? And I think not just our industry is subject to this question of like, can AI? I think everybody in every job is like, can AI replace what I'm doing? I would say in the short term and right now, I look at AI as an advantage if you know how to use it well and not just create AI generated I have 8-year-old Gen Alpha kids that are very frequently talk about AI slop, and you can, if you don't know how to use generative AI well, you can succumb to AI slop as an analyst as well. But I think if you know how to integrate it in the right way into your workflow, I think it actually, at least for me, find it makes me faster. Like a good example is like, I love Notebook LM from Google. It has made my ability to like synthesize a bunch of information so much faster than I ever could in the past.
Yeah, plus one to that. Anybody who needs to like analyze documents, calls, whatever, like Notebook LM is so great for that.
Yeah, like for me, it's like obviously within the umbrella underneath application security and software supply chain security is huge, right? Like trying to track everything and understand everything that's happening from like the recent NPM attack to understanding MCP servers and their security weaknesses, and how AI agents work, and like all this technology, like using AI to help you learn, I think can help make an analyst better and faster. Long term, I don't think the question you're asking is wrong. I do think when I look at it in terms of like, is it going to change the analyst industry? Probably. At least it's going to force maybe some of the older models to and styles of like the paywall gated, some of the way the analyst business is run might have to adjust to adapt to AI. But the one thing I will say is analysts have a ton of NDA information. We get previews of things like well in advance of when they're out there, and we also, again, that multitude of different personas in an industry or a market that we're able to speak with and connect is a way that like I don't think AI ever could get to, because even if you trained a model on like everything IVC ever wrote, right? There's always this level of information that's not published that we have, that we're able, that comes up in conversation. So much of what we do is not even written, right? Like it's had in conversations and advisory. That's the part that I think that AI can't touch right now.